Well, first of all, I got to agree to the recording now. Okay. Thank you again for having us. Paul and I have been doing ethics a lot over the last few years, and we're thrilled to be here to make sure that you guys remain ethical planners. So just a note, I have to leave about 20 to 10 because I am giving a ethics presentation to the Canadian Institute of Planners. Unfortunately, it's remote, but what can you do anyway? But Paul will stay on to make sure that the session meets the requirements for your CM credits.
I'll be checking to make sure nobody leaves early, Karen.
Yeah, right. We lock the doors. Valerie, you've got that right. Okay.
All right, so let's go in. Everything looking okay, Karen? Screen-wise?
Everything looks great.
Yep. Okay, great. You never know with Zoom. You're always just talking to your computer, and it's hard to know what other people are seeing. But yeah, let's get into this. Looking at pieces of the year of 2021. Many of you know who we are. So I'm Paul Ingram. I'm Director for Growth Management at the Puget Sound Regional Council, and really glad to be with you guys up in the Northwest section. Recognize many of the names. And as Karen said, we talk about ethics a number of different times. I served on the AICP Commission back about 10 years ago, and have been involved with kind of ethics discussion ever since. Karen, you want to say about kind of what your current duties are?
Sure. Yeah. Again, I recognize many names. It's great to see your faces. I wish we were in person as well. I just retired after many years, decades at King County. I remain active in APA. I am the Region 5 representative on the AICP Commission and chair of the Ethics Committee. And then beginning in January, I have the distinct honor to become the new president-elect of AICP. So following in Paul's footsteps from about 10 years ago. So yeah, so again, happy to see all of you, and let's get going.
Right, and we're excited to have you become the new president, or president-elect at least, to begin with. So just covering our agenda real quick. APA puts out this case of the year. We have a new set of cases for this year. So if you've done this in the past, it's kind of the same format, but a few new cases, and they're always a little bit different. So stay tuned. We'll go through them, and there's some fun differences this year. So let me turn this little screen on. You can use your phones, and in fact, we really want you to. We have a couple of things. One is, if you have multiple screens, great, because we're both going to use Mentimeter, where you can do some polling on the questions. And then we're also going to ask for you to look up the ethics code online, so you have it handy as you answer the questions. So if you can manage that somehow, of using both multiple screens here, that would be great in this instance. Let's see here if we can do this. And next screen here, just a little kind of warm up to make sure everybody's kind of figuring out Mentimeter. And if you didn't get that QR code, any of the screens that have the polling, you can just go to the menti.com and then enter in that code, and you'll be able to participate along. And Mentimeter on that other screen will show the slides as they're occurring, in addition to allow you to do the interactive polling. And of course, you're pretty much all from the Northwest. I see a Sparks, Nevada.
Wow.
Which is great. Love that Sparks, Nevada is part of the Northwest section this morning. Lots of Bellingham, Mount Vernon, Burlington, Anacortes, somebody from Kitsap calling in. Great. So this is fun. Expect that you're from those places, but just to get you kind of started. So Snohomish, yay, Ferndale and Coupeville, so fun. So we'll keep going. So this is the other website. So if you just on one of your screens, If you're like me, I have the small, medium, and large screens in front of me. So on one of them, type in planning.org/ethics, and that's your link to the ethics page at APA. And you can get to the code as well as all the other kind of stuff about there. The disclaimer that we always tell people is that, like, Karen and I enjoy getting out and being able to talk with people. We enjoy doing it in person, but hey, we're doing it online. But really, if you want to have questions, if you have questions and you want specific advice, we encourage you to call or contact the AICP ethics officer. The phone number's there. The email's really easy. You might even just be able to remember it just from this one session here, ethics@planning.org. So if you have a situation, you're not sure, don't call me up. Call the phone number there, or email ethics@planning.org. And in a minute, we'll show you a map. And we've been having more and more kind of inquiries about ethics, which we think is great. And I think Karen talks about that here in an upcoming slide. So just a few things about the code and the principles of ethics and planning. So there are these three kind of guiding things of serving the public interests, maintaining high standards of integrity and proficiency, and improving planning competence. And when I think about ethics and planning, I often can kind of turn back to these because I can sort of remember these 3 points. I certainly can't remember all the aspects of the code. In fact, that's why we want you to have the code in front of you, because Karen and I are kind of doing the presentation. We don't have the code in front of us. And some of the cases as we go through.
I got mine.
Karen has hers. She has it printed out, of course. She's on the committee.
It's dog-eared.
I have it in one of my various menus on screens, and I don't want to get distracted and start trying to click through everything. But we want you to, because some of the cases do get into those technicalities as to what's in the code. But in a day-to-day life, you're probably not looking up the code. But it's easy to remember these 3 principles of, are we serving the public interests? Are we maintaining that high standard of our profession? Are we improving planning competence? The code has the aspirational principles, which are similar to what we were just saying. The rules, which is kind of like the zoning code of ethics, if you will. And then there are also the advisory opinions, complaints, and the discipline procedures. So if there's an actual case, kind of what are the rules for handling that case, and the different options of discipline. And we have a couple of different discipline measures that happened in these cases this year. So it'll give us a chance to talk about, like, well, what are the right ways to respond? Those aspirational principles, the overall responsibility to the public. How are the decisions that we make, are they responsible to the public? Are they fair? Are they appropriate for society? Are they treating different populations equitably? Are the decisions that we do on one hand, or in one case, fair compared to another case? Also, how do we, what's our responsibility to our clients and employers? When we do work for people, are we giving them professional work? Are we avoiding conflicts of interest? Are we telling our employers about the things that we're doing, perhaps with somebody else? And 3, the responsibility to our profession. And this comes back to things like doing this session. Are we, training ourselves to be better planners every day? Are we competent in our knowledge? Are we contributing back to the profession and helping the public understand that planning as a profession can contribute to our communities? The rules of conduct, as I said, it's kind of like the zoning code of ethics. This gets into the specific rules and the rules that can be enforced through either censure or removal of the AICP credential. And this has to do with, like, abusing one's position, conflicts of interest, false statements, being honest, lack of cooperation, legal and ethical, loyalty to one's employer. Oh, I meant to have some water with me. and of course, respect of confidentiality. So the types of different things, and these are, I was about to say constantly evolving. They're not constantly, but about every 5 or 10 years, the AICP Commission does look at these rules and continues to look at how do they need to be updated, that it's more than just some of the traditional planning aspects, but even making sure that they're staying up to date with the current topics and themes that we have in our profession. So this year, I think I might be turning over to Karen here in a slide or two, but this year we have, or is this you, Karen?
Yeah, it's me, but it's
okay. No, that's great. I need to take a drink of water, so I'll turn it over to Karen.
Okay, perfect.
Here we go.
Great. Well, thank you. So this year we've actually had 20 misconduct cases, and it's about normal for a year. And what's interesting, I mean, this was 2020, which we had thought might be different. We thought there might be a lot fewer cases, but it actually, people were doing their work. So in accordance with our ethics, was pretty much a normal year. So 8 cases were brought against planners. Those were dismissed by the ethics officer. 6 more cases were dismissed after the ethics officer did a little more investigation and talked to the planner and realized that the complaint was frivolous and dismissed those. 4 cases were settled, and these are typically, and in this case, they all are, misuse of the AICP credentials. So as AICP planners, as you know, we have a commitment to continuing our education and acquiring CM credits, and also pay our dues to APA. And if you neglect to do either one of those, you need to stop using your AICP credential. Unfortunately, we had 4 planners that continued to use it upon discussion with the ethics officer. They were called out for that, and they stopped using their credential. Basically, case closed. We had 2 disciplinary actions, which you'll see coming up later on in the cases. One, a 1-year suspension. So according to the disciplinary options, that's sort of the second most stringent, being revocation of your AICP credential, the most stringent. And then another confidential letter of admonition. So the planner did behave without accordance to the code of ethics and received a confidential letter, but it didn't raise to the level of that they needed to have their AICP credential suspended. And let's see what the most cases were. So this includes, these are the topics that came up. So this includes not only the cases I just talked about, but all the advisory opinions. Remember, Paul talked about the ethics officer, how to reach the ethics officer. He is there to help you through any kind of planning action. You're not sure whether it's ethical or not. Jen will talk you through it to give you, again, informal advice. And all of those are included in this too. And you can see the topics that came up most frequently were number 1, accurate information, and then wrongful conduct, which is kind of the catch-all. And then where did these topics come from? Well, you can see on the map all across the country. And as Paul mentioned before, in Washington State, we had 5. I actually, we like to see high numbers, because high numbers means that our planners want to behave ethically. So you're faced with a decision, a pathway. You're not sure which is the most ethical pathway for you to take. And you call the ethics officer and discuss it. That becomes a topic. and an advisory opinion, and is included on this map. And so we want to encourage you to never hesitate to call the ethics officer and get that advice before moving forward.
So Karen, next year, can we get a map of just the disciplinary cases so we can see who's the baddest too?
Oh, yeah, we could do that, but then that may be too much information. So we like to keep these anonymous. Okay, so we're talking about the code, but like our zoning codes, as Paul's been referencing, our code of ethics, they need to be updated. You know, times change. We learn new techniques and new approaches, and we're in the middle of that process. Well, no, we're almost at the end of that process. I know I'll talk about that a little bit in just a second. And so I think you'll see the new code, which you'll see hopefully in January, has a renewed emphasis on equity and social justice, and recognizing the planner's role in undoing inequities and promoting equity throughout our communities, but also an acknowledgement on the role the planning profession has had in the current inequities we see today, such as highway expansion, such as redlining, and so on. And so we also work to eliminate differences around the country. So we had provisions that said, discrimination that was not in accordance with state law. Well, not every state is like Washington State, where we have strong anti-discrimination and anti-harassment laws. So we made that more consistent and more explicit. So the timeline, where are we on this? As I said, we're almost at the end of this multi-year process. It's very exciting. We started with a task force a couple of years ago. We had a big town hall meeting back in June, as any good planner would have for their new regulations. We had over 500 people on the webinar. It was pretty exciting. We received comments till the end of June, and then worked through the summer on incorporating those comments into revisions. The AICP Commission has guided those revisions and reviewed them over the last several months, and expected to vote on this next month, so in a couple of weeks. And then we expect the new code of ethics to be in effect. Actually, we're looking at January now to give staff the time to prepare the documents and so on. And then in the when you start up with your new CM beginning next year in the spring, and at the National Planning Conference, we'll be talking about the new code. And so very exciting indeed. We are looking forward to sharing that with you next year.
Karen, two key parts of that update I wanted to check on with you. One is, so the hour credit changes, right?
Correct. So the hour-and-a-half credit will change to an hour. So right now, as you know, as certified planners, you have your, I think it's 32 required credits over the course of 2 years. 3 of those are mandatory credits, 1.5 for ethics, 1.5 for law. That will change in 2022. The total credits remain, but now you'll have 4 mandatory credits, 1 hour each. So ethics goes from 1.5 to 1. Law goes from 1.5 to 1. We've added a new equity credit and a new sustainability credit. So learning about sustainability. And I've noticed, in all the years I've been attending our Washington State and Oregon as well, the joint conferences, equity and sustainability are always well covered. So I think Washington State, Oregon as well, we're well positioned to make sure that you as planners have the opportunity to receive those new credits.
And then Karen, I think you said last time, for those that are working towards taking the test this spring or this
Correct.
year, the changes that are happening to the code right now, they're not going to like pop up on this year's test.
No, 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 no. Good point. No, we're not trying to trick anyone. If you are studying for the AICP exam in May, you will be working off of the current code, and then we'll work in new questions based on the new code in subsequent test periods.
Great.
Thanks for that clarification, Paul.
Okay, so we want to get back into interactive mode. And before we get into the seriousness of our ethics cases, I want to just ask, we have a Halloween weekend coming up. I probably should have asked the question of like, what are you dressing up as for Halloween? But I want to ask, what's the best Halloween candy? And I think we can just show results here. So if you're able to get back in, tell us what, when you went trick-or-treating, what were you always hoping to get? Oh, results are hidden. I hid them instead of showing them. Okay, there we go. Okay, user error.
Oh, Snickers
seems to be benefiting that everybody typed it in the same. I see Reese's peanut butter cups.
Oh yeah,
spelled like 3 or 4 different ways. I was gonna say I always like the small Reese's peanut butter cups, and then I would freeze them. I like them frozen. And I like the smaller ones better than the bigger ones. This is good. Okay, we're gonna have to move on before we get mentally
so now we
distracted
know
about
if we were
food.
meeting in person, we know what treats to bring. So this is good.
Yeah,
It's like
somebody's healthy and
Snickers.
said an apple. They're very good. Vegetables, homemade cookies. When I was a kid, there was one neighbor that always made popcorn balls, which I
Oh
thought was
wow.
great, but it was also at that time when like you weren't supposed to have homemade treats, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so ethics. We have a cast of characters. If you've done this with us in the past, you've seen some, and I think we have a couple kind of new and different characters that play these roles, so that we've taken away the actual people, made them our planning characters to work through the different scenarios. So let's see here. So scenario 1, I'll start reading, and Karen and I will kind of go back and forth. It's all about plagiarism. And of course, keep in your mind, like, isn't planning one of those things in which we often borrow from each other? Beverly AICP is a planning consultant. She's been hired to prepare a hazard mitigation plan for Greene County as required by state law. As part of her research, Beverly finds a plan for Lorain County, a jurisdiction facing similar issues. She decides to use the text of that plan, which she did not write. After making a few revisions, Beverly and the county supervisor submit the draft plan to the Planning Commission. APA wrote this up. They call it the Plan Commission for, I guess, other parts of the country. But however, neither Beverly nor the supervisor informed the members of the Plan Commission, either verbally or in writing, that their draft is largely based on another county's plan. After several working meetings, the Plan Commission forwards the revised plan to the county board for adoption. At the next county board meeting, a resident makes a charge of plagiarism, noting that nearly half of the Greene County plan is a word-for-word copy of the Lorain County plan. Beverly and the board chair defend the plan, noting that copying from other public documents is standard planning practice. However, several Plan Commission members complained they weren't informed about the copied document. So, is she guilty of plagiarism? Yes, no, or not sure. We'll move to the Mentimeter slide here. And there's the little tracker in the lower right. I'm not sure, like, how many people do we have signed in total? We have 52 participants, so we'll try to get a little bit higher in our results before we show them. All right, we're getting close here, getting up there. Let's go ahead and take a look. And if you're still thinking about it, feel free to continue to add it in. So yes, one person said, no, not really. So I'm not sure. And what I see and hear in talking about this is like, well, she did copy stuff directly. That was undisputed. So the second question, so she did copy things from the other county. Did she violate the ethics code? So let's answer that question. Yes or no? Did she actually violate the ethics code in what she did? Oh, and here we're just seeing it right off. It's all right. Well, we'll just see it as it happens, and maybe that'll influence your choice. That's fine. So now if you say yes, you have to be thinking, which code is it that she violated? You can't just say that she did it. But if we're actually to prosecute a case, if we're to discipline somebody, then we have to identify where in the code was it. And this is where something might go to the ethics committee. The ethics officer would review and take a look at that code and say, okay, these are the specific code provisions that were impacted. Okay, so we're getting a pretty strong yes, but still some not sures about it. So let's look at what some of those code and rules that might apply. So first, there's the aspirational principles. We shall have independent professional judgment that we're providing to our clients and employers. Was she doing that, or was she just copying? One of the things with all of these cases of the year is that they strip out a lot of the detail. So you kind of don't quite maybe know how to answer that question. Like, did she just copy blatantly? Or did she copy but with using professional judgment and said, hey, this is really good stuff, and we should use it. I want to protect and enhance the integrity of our profession, not accept the applicability of a customary solution, not just recycling something just for expediency. And then some of the rules that are perhaps more important here. The rules say that we shall not seek professional recognition or acclaim intended for producers of original work. And I think that's really interesting to think about. Like, so she copied, but was she seeking acclaim or recognition? Does that count as recognition that she turned it in? And not conducting wrongful acts, especially those that reflect adversely on our professional fitness. So those are some different principles and rules that apply. Karen, what do you think about did she cross that line? Did she just professionally use a good quality work out there? Or did she cross that line and really kind of do something that was not professional and not consistent with the rules?
Yeah, and I think I know a little too much about this one, and I felt that she totally crossed the line. What she did was copy verbatim another communities and other jurisdictions plan, and that happened to be a 10-year-old plan. And I realized that when we went back and looked, I should have added that into the scenario description, because she did, as a consultant who was being paid to develop a plan, went and copied a neighboring jurisdiction's 10-year-old plan and passed it off as her own work. She never referenced it. She never told the planning commission, her client, what she had done. And what's interesting, and we'll talk about the outcome in just a second, but there was a split on the commission, or rather on the ethics committee, as to whether or not she was in clear violation of the code of ethics. So in my mind, it was very clear but not among everybody. So you get a sense that applying the code of ethics, there's judgment involved and interpretation and so on. And we'll talk about that in a second. And I'll let Paul talk about the rules of conduct.
Yeah, and I could see how that would work out, Karen. I mean, like you said, if somebody's copying an out-of-date, potentially out-of-date work, not telling her employer that she's doing it, passing it off as her own work, that does seem to me to cross the line. But then when I read these rules, it makes it a little hard to figure out, like, okay, how do you take that specific real case and apply that to this wording of adversely reflecting on our professional fitness? You know, it's like that the wording that we have in the code covers it, but it creates some ambiguity. Hence the commission or the committee, you know, looking at making updates to the code on a periodic basis. So let's talk about the outcomes. In this real life case that the scenario was based on, Beverly should not have copied the text from the other county's plan without, one, referencing it. It says, or I would say, and disclosing it to the plan commission. And that's one of the themes in many of the ethics cases, is that level of transparency and honesty. Is somebody being clear of, you know, they might go to another county and say, they've done this great work. I think we should borrow from that, talk about it with the planning commission. That might be very appropriate, but to pass it off as their own work is not. Beverly had not sought a claim according to Rule 17, but the committee did rule that she had committed a wrongful act adversely affecting her professional fitness. She received a letter of admonition. Another fun word. Okay.
So, and that was like that's the least stringent of sort of the disciplinary hierarchy. And again, what was interesting, and I want to talk about this a little bit, because I think as you, you know, approach your own work and, you know, that it's not always 100% clear. She didn't seek a claim. Well, does a claim mean a prize? Like, did she submit it for an award? Or is a claim that you, you know, trying to attribute someone else's work to your own? And so that's really how the ethics committee approached this, and trying to parse it out. Some on the committee felt you receive a 1-year suspension. Everyone agreed that it reflects adversely on us as planners as a whole. That is a profession. It's kind of a sneaky kind of thing to do, inappropriate action to take. Everyone on the committee agreed that, but then there was debate about the level or the stringency on the discipline. And the confidential admonition is basically like, you know, the proverbial slap on the wrist. It says, you know, you did act against the code of ethics, and don't do it in the future. So,
yeah. Okay, scenario 2A. You want to read this one, Karen?
Sure. So this is a two-parter, and this is something that many of us face and over the course of our careers as planners. We're active in our communities. So Catherine, AICP, is a staff planner with the city of Bowerville, but she lives in Worcester, which is 30 miles away. Worcester's Mary asked Catherine if she would be willing to serve on the planning commission. There are no extraterritorial jurisdiction issues between the two communities, but they are also located in two different counties. So first question, and Paul will cue this up: should Catherine get written permission to serve on the Worcester Planning Commission?
We'll stay hidden for a few seconds here.
It's still coming in.
I want to know the question, like, what if it's not written permission? What if she just does it verbally?
Yeah.
I'm always looking for the other
Yeah.
scenario, the other way of doing it. Okay,
Well, written could be in an email.
could just be in an email.
Yeah.
I don't know if the ethics code has been updated for like text messages and stuff. Okay, let's see what people are saying. So a lot of yeses. If you say no, okay. Any other responses? Okay, should we keep going?
Let's keep going because we have part 2. So Catherine wanted to serve on the planning commission, and now we have Norm who wants to serve on his homeowners association. So he's a planner with the city of Leventon, where he also resides and owns property, which is pretty common. Most of us live and work in the same community. Norm is asked to be on the board of his homeowners association, which receives no city funding and no formal relationship with city government. Should Norm get written permission from a supervisor to serve on the board of his homeowners association?
Okay, and we'll pull it. Oh,
interesting.
I think we have about 25 that are actively in Mint.
I know. Yeah. Come on, you guys. This is fun.
So yeah, so let's talk about the differences between the two of these. Both it essentially is, should we tell people, and as I was noting before, Karen, like, well, is there a difference between getting a written letter from your employer or asking in writing? Email, you said, might be fine. But what if you just go and talk to your boss and say like, hey, I think I'm doing of such and such? So I wonder, when some people say no, like, is that the difference between, like, do you formally need to get written permission or written approval versus are you just above board and do you tell people around?
Yeah. And I think in this case too, is we talked about, as planners, we're very involved in our community. And as such, we tend to volunteer, we get asked, to participate in our community. I, for example, serve on an advisory committee for Children's Hospital in my neighborhood, and that's through the city of Seattle, even though I worked for King County, but I did get permission ahead of time in order to do so. And to me, it comes down to the integrity of the planning profession. You don't want to see, like in the case of the HOA, for example, if the HOA applies to the city for permits, I think it's important that Norm supervisor knows that he's on the HOA. And so let's, look at the actual code. I think, as Paul was saying, you look at the aspirational principles. This is kind of like our policy. This is what we shall do, we should be doing. This is to guide our behavior. And then the rules are kind of like our zoning code, there are regulations. So let's see what the rules say about this on the next slide. So in the rules of conduct, really in this case, it's one rule, it's number 4. So we shall not, as salaried employees, undertake other employment in planning or related profession with or whether or not for pay. And so what I want to add is, when we are in the code update, we are clarifying this position, this code, because what if you're not salaried, but you're hourly? Well, when you look at this and you start parsing it out, it has to be clear. But But the reason this rule is in is, again, integrity of the profession, the need for planners to be transparent in their actions and to always be looking at the public interest. And because it's like balancing the goals of the GMA, right? So we have aspirational principles that tell us we should be serving in our community. And then we also have principles that say we should be avoiding conflict of interest. So again, it's balancing all of this. So let's see what the outcome is on these two different cases. And again, these are all, we've scrubbed the names and locations, but they're all real life cases. And in Catherine's case, this was actually a misconduct case. So a member of the public filed a case, a claim against Catherine. After investigation, the ethics officer dismissed the claim. So that was when we talked several slides earlier about dismissal of complaints. This is one of them that was dismissed, that there was because membership on the planning commission was really not. You want to make your presentation interactive and engage your audience using Mentimeter. Employment. The only issue is that you already have and then in the second one, there was no complaint. This was sort of the other way to that you would interact with the ethics officer. And this is the one that's proactive. And this is where you call the ethics officer and ask for advice. And the ethics officer in this case said, although written disclosure or permission was not required, he still might want to inform a supervisor, and that he should be sure to recuse himself and divulge his city employment whenever appropriate, such as if they get want a permit to build a new swimming pool or something to that effect. And so again, it's being forthright, disclosing, and avoiding that conflict of interest.
Yeah, with these, Karen, I think the outcomes help highlight why it's valuable to get that written permission. I mean, oftentimes it feels annoying to have to ask for permission. It's kind of like going to your parents and asking if you can, go do something on a Friday night or something. But while one could be transparent and not ask for that written permission, Catherine's case is a clear case of like having it in hand is a way to deal with it. Like, you never know if somebody from the public might file a case against you, and it might be annoying and not factual or whatever, but having that document in hand allows you to directly address any sort of complaint that might come up. And then in Norm's case, maybe there's no conflict between the city and his homeowners association today, but what if his homeowners association has to get a permit for their stormwater pond, or wants to build something or do some interaction with the city someday in the future? How does he ensure that there's not a conflict of interest at that future date? So it's like there might not be today, but how does he prepare himself for that future time?
Yeah. And we have a question from someone.
And Karen, I think there were a couple of chats that came in. I can't view the chat.
Yeah, they were about Mentimeter. I just looked. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. We keep going?
Keep going.
All right.
This one's you.
Okay, I will read this one. 2 years ago, Sam, AICP, a planning consultant, worked on an accessory dwelling unit ordinance for the town of Cullersville. The ordinance, which was approved by City Council, limited ADUs to the city's more densely populated sections, which also is where a large percentage of the city's minority residents reside. Recently, in light of equity concerns, Sam has been reconsidering his work on the ordinance. He now would like to recommend to Odelia, AICP, Cullersville's planning director, that the city should revise the ADU ordinance to be much more inclusive. But Sam is concerned that by doing so, he could be violating rule of conduct number 3 relating to change positions. So should Sam voice his concerns to Odelia, Kohlersville's planning director, yes or no? Well, let's go ahead and pull this. You can see the results as we go. We'll just leave it that way. So a lot of people, I mean, in some ways, an easy yes of saying like, it doesn't hurt to voice your concerns, right? But there is this rule. So I think there's another part here. If Sam works on these revisions on behalf of Kohlersville, is he violating that rule? So it's like, well, he could voice his concerns, but now is he advocating for something different than what he advocated before and breaking that rule? How's this specific rule apply? The no's got off to an early start, influencing the outcome here.
I just want to say, someone put it in the chat, and thank you for doing that, but how to get to Mentimeter, the directions are on top of the this slide on any of the polling slides. If you missed the QR code.
Right, so we got a strong note for with that question. I will flip back here to the voting instructions. So if you want to use the QR code, you can pull up the camera on your phone and scan that QR code. And then, as Karen was just saying, you can also just go to menti.com and enter in the code on the screen, and that shows up with all of the polling questions. So if you kind of lose your place or close your screen and want to get back to it, it's right there at the top. So a lot of people saying no, as far as violating rule number 3. And and I appreciate the not sure's. I always love it when people are honest and say not sure. Because a lot of these things, it seems like that the response is clear, but then it's really this question is like, but is it a violation or not? And how so? So let's talk a little bit about the principles of the code. We should be conscious of the rights of others. So his equity concerns are well-founded. The long-range consequences, opportunities for all persons. These are all principles that really get at some of the different aspects of equity. We shall have an independent professional judgment, not just have a customary solution without its appropriateness. And shall contribute time and effort in planning resources, including volunteer professional activities. I'm not so sure about 3J kind of applying here because it's within his professional job, but this idea of we want to do the right thing, I think is what the principles are getting at. The code, okay, so this is where we kind of have to parse the wording a bit, and we can just kind of read through it, but focusing on some of those blue words. And I think we read in one of the other ones that we shall not accept an assignment to publicly advocate a position that is indistinguishably adverse to a position we publicly advocated for a previous client or employer within the past 3 years. So if in the past 3 years we're advocating one thing, we're not supposed to just flip and advocate for another. And this is kind of focused on, potentially you're working for a city one day, you change, you work for a consultant, and now you're advocating for something totally different. It's like we're supposed to have integrity in our judgment and our professionalism. But there are there's these 2 unless clauses, unless we determine in good faith and after consultation with other professionals that our change position will not cause present detriment to our previous client or employer. So it kind of says, planners love process. So this creates a process of like, well, if you talk with others and you're doing it in good faith, maybe there's an opportunity. And two, we make full written disclosure of the conflict to our current employer. Now, like I said, I think this was really written with the idea that maybe somebody's changing employers. Here, he's not changing employers, so it's a little bit different. Karen, any thoughts on kind of how this rule applies?
Yeah, and this one is being cleaned up a little bit as well, but you're absolutely right. This was written to apply in a situation where someone actually changes jobs. And again, you think about moving from a local jurisdiction to a consulting firm, and then, you know, working against a code or provision that you promoted when you worked for the jurisdiction. And this, you know, they're saying what, and this is the only time that there's a time element in the rules, and just saying for 3 years, just cool it for a little bit. Not, you know, again, this has to do with integrity of the profession. So you don't want to be seen. The planning profession is one that just flip flops, you know, based on who's paying your salary, but it's actually grounded in beliefs and integrity and you know, respect for your elected officials, your current employer, your previous employer, and so on. So this was a little bit of a different application of this rule, but nonetheless, that was the rule that kind of fit best in this case.
So Karen, Valerie has her hand up. Valerie, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I have a question about this one specifically.
Yeah.
So it says advocate a position. So if I'm just an employee who's been directed by my supervisor to draft an ordinance that I previously, you know, would have written differently if I was with a different employer, but I'm not the one actually taking it to like the planning commission for review, is that still like similar here, or is it okay to follow direction of my supervisor to draft something?
Yeah, I see it as like what Karen was saying. You know, we're not supposed to be just advocating for whatever somebody tells us to. So if we've actually advocated for something, then presumably our position is based upon analysis or facts or, you know, public comment, the different things. If you're doing a task, then maybe that's a little bit different. Maybe you never took a position previously on that thing. But I think it does get down to that idea of like our recommendations, whether they're to our employers or to the public or to a board, they should be based upon our planning analysis and professional judgment. And that we shouldn't just change that judgment because we have a new employer.
Correct. And I think in that case, Valerie, that again, that's where, you know, the application of all codes, you know, it's a bit of a gray area. And if you're ever faced in that situation, I just recommend you contact the ethics officer and talk it through. Paul and I are always happy to talk about ethics, but as you know, Paul read the disclaimer at the beginning, we're not the ethics officer, but I think again, it's publicly. So I think that you can sort of apply that in your situation, you know, to your own situation. But, you know, certainly someone working in the lower ranks behind the scenes is different than someone who presented, the director, for example, who presented the staff report to the Planning Commission. We have another question.
Yeah, Nabil.
Thank you. Yes, my question was more about what happens if after advocating for a certain position, someone gets a certain pushback from the public or became aware of the implications that are related to environmental or social justice that lead them to take a different position than the one that they had before.
Great question, Nabil. And I think that actually is kind of what's happening here. I mean, this is happening after it had been adopted, and then he's kind of going back and kind of reassessing. but it's very similar of like, yeah, new information comes out. Whether it's new information comes out in the public meeting from the public, or it comes out after the fact, after something's been adopted, or we just go through a time period where people become more aware of, in this case, of like equity issues, and what might have seemed like a reasonable, pragmatic approach of only allowing ADUs in higher density areas. Now one might look at that and say like, well, isn't that kind of furthering kind of the redlining aspects of the past of like only putting certain things in certain parts of the city and not in other parts of the city? I think this is a great case where it's like, there's this aspect of not wanting to like just change your opinion because you've changed employers. But the other side of it is like, we should be changing our opinions as we have new information, and especially to do better planning work.
Absolutely agree 100% with that. And it's acknowledging the evolving nature of planning. So Paul, why don't you talk about what happened in this case?
Right. So the ethics officer was consulted, said his concerns were supported by several of the aspirational principles. And this is a great one in which the aspirational principles gave a lot of support that we saw earlier to Sam's decision, even though that code was kind of saying like, hey, you shouldn't change your position. So a little bit of tension between them, and in a great case in which the aspirational principles help kind of guide us, I think, to the right outcome, as opposed to just kind of relying on that code saying, don't change your position. Because like you said, Nabil, new information comes out. We need to be able to be responsive to that. The ethics officer suggested that Sam raise this issue with Odelia in private, I think at least initially, rather than at a public meeting, so that his changed position would not cause detriment to his client. To me, that raises some questions to like, well, what if Odelia says like, hey, just keep a lid on it? What does he do then? But it certainly makes sense that if you have concerns with your employer about something that the city's doing, and I think many of us, we work for cities, we don't always agree with what our cities decide to adopt. Where do we raise that concern? Do we raise it with our supervisor, the planning director, with the mayor? Do we go to the public meeting and, like complain about it? And I think the ethics code would suggest that for the most part, we don't want to be both working for the city and campaigning against it. But that we should try to find the pragmatic way of raising those concerns through our professional position. Okay, should we keep going?
Keep going.
Any other hands up? I don't see any.
Good question. Yeah.
If we miss a comment in the chat, because like I said, when sharing screen, it's hard to see the chats, and do feel free to raise your hands. Karen, this one.
Sure. I love this scenario. So because I think it's a situation many of us find ourselves in, although hopefully we all behave very differently than this planner. So here we have Norm again. He's the planning director of Levittown. At a contentious public meeting, a resident opposes a school expansion project, citing inadequate water service. The next day, a contractor applies for a pull permit for Fen Estates, where the resident lives. Norm responds to the contractor on a city email and uses a derogatory term for the resident. He copies several city officials and the resident on the email. So, we've all been at that public meeting where there is a member of the public who just gets under our skin, and we think we'd like to do something like what Norm did, but we're good planners and we go home and have a cup of chamomile tea or a beer or whatever and calm ourselves down and let it go. But unfortunately, later that evening, Norm posted on his personal Facebook page under a pseudonym, but I think everybody knew who it was. And he used even more obscene phrases to describe the same resident. The next morning, realizing what he had done, he makes several attempts to erase it, but the damage was done.
Oh, Norm.
I
Norm,
know.
Norm. Okay,
So what do you guys think? Did Norm violate the code of ethics?
so we all know that like that's not the best thing to do in this situation. But of course, this is the ethics session. So it's the question, did he violate the code, right?
Mhm.
Okay, if you say yes, you're going to have to tell us which section. Nice unanimous decision here.
Yeah, this one, I think.
Everybody's saying yes. And a couple brave souls admitting that they don't know the code well
Yeah, and that's fair.
enough.
Again, these are never, you know, there's always a if then, there's always a but. So,
Well, and there have been a number of cases where we've come across where it seems like somebody's doing something clearly wrong, as one might call it, just generally, but where it's not really covered in the code.
mm-mm.
This one, the code does have a few sections, but before we talk about kind of those code processes, let's ask another question. So,
Okay, so what type of disciplinary? So this is the 4 levels of discipline that are allowed for in the code. We've talked about the confidential letter of admonition. Public censure sounds like we put you in the town square with a sign on you. No, 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 no. Public censure, and we're changing this in the code because I think that's kind of an archaic term. It would be a public letter of admonition so that the person who filed the complaint would also get a copy of the letter. A confidential letter of admonition is just between the ethics officer and the ethics committee and the planner, not the person who brought the complaint. Public censure means the person who brought the complaint would see the letter as well. There's a suspension of your AICP certification for a specified period of time, and then revocation. That's it, you're out. You have an opportunity, I think it's 5 years hence, to reapply for certification. I think you'd have to retake the exam. I'm not sure all the rules on that one, but that would be the 4 levels. So if you believe that Norm violated the code, how would you discipline him?
oh, yeah, I want to ask it, if you violated the code, how would you want to be disciplined?
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, go ahead and we'll see. I hid the results. Oh, no, I didn't. No,
Mhm.
we'll let people influence each other a little bit here.
That's okay.
And I asked, I kind of added that phrasing of the question, Karen, because the last time we did it, there was a lot of like, throw the book at him, kick him
Yeah.
out.
But if it was you
person
and
even
you had
asked,
a
like-
lapse in judgment, although a very public lapse in judgment, I think that's a good question, Paul. How do you think you should be disciplined?
And last time I thought, Karen, somebody kind of said like, well, like what would be worse? Which I thought was kind of funny because like there are many, many worse things that one could potentially do, and that the ethics committee has come across of people doing things where they're, you know, how do fraud and
Oh, yeah.
other illegal activity associated
Mhm.
with being a planner. So one could do a lot worse. Public censure, getting kind of the most votes.
Yeah. Okay. So again, let's talk about how we apply the aspirational principles. You know, pretty clearly, we should have concern for the long-range consequences of our current actions. We shall deal fairly with all participants in the planning process. Was it fair for him to specifically call out this person after they applied for the permit? You know, so like, would he have done that had she not spoken out at the public meeting the night before, for example? This is, you know, 3A, we talk about this a lot, protect and enhance the integrity of the profession. You know, it reflects poorly on all of us planners, right? To have someone go out with that kind of comment on a member of the public. And, we shall always deal in a fair and professional manner, and this was far from professional. Okay, so those are the principles, but what actually is the code? Did this person violate the code? Rule 10 and Rule 25. Rule 10, we shall not misrepresent the qualification, views, and findings of other professionals. So this member of the public who submitted, the permit, are we being, in this case was Norm being critical of the engineer or the architect or whoever submitted the permit? And then sort of the catch-all on this, Rule 25, we've talked about this a lot. We shall not deliberately nor with reckless indifference. And the new code gets rid of the reckless indifference, just saying, basically do anything that reflects adversely on our professional fitness. So let's see, I see some comments in the chat come in, but it's hard for us to read those and run the presentation at the same time. So I apologize. We'll take a look at those in just a sec. So this was an interesting case in this real life scenario. So in the way it's written, Norm is a planning director, and it was clear the ethics committee agreed that he had committed a wrongful act and that reflected adversely on his professional fitness, Rule 25. But I want to add that in this case, Norm was actually a staff planner, and his supervisor contacted the ethics officer and said, hey, Norm, he's like the best planner I've had in years. And so as an association, what we felt as the ethics committee that was really important to mentor Norm. And so we felt that it was severe enough that he needed to have his certification suspended for a year. But at the same time, we found a retired FAICP member in the area who met with Norm, had coffee with him, and served as his mentor. Again, as an association, our job is to support our members and, in this case, kind of give them a second chance. And so that was the outcome. So Paul, have you had a chance to look at the chat while I've been chatting?
No, I'm not able to see the chat while
Okay.
sharing my screen.
Okay.
I'll give you a chance to take a look.
Yeah. Rule 20, do not discriminate, possible depending on, right, that's true. That's a very good point. Yeah. What's interesting is there should be a public shaming option to discipline Norm. This was actually in the local papers, and that became part of the evidence that the ethics committee looked at. And so this was, as you can imagine, not a private issue.
Yeah, so it's kind of the thing I was taught, I think, from day one in planning, before ever being AICP, was the whole will it show up in the newspaper adage of like, don't do anything that you don't want to be in the newspaper. So good golden rule of planning.
Yeah, great.
Okay, let's go to number 5. Revolving door. So we remember a little bit from the prior case about kind of the changing positions, but Sam, AICP, who recently retired as the planning director of Hartford County, has started a private consulting firm. 6 months after his retirement, Sam is approached by a developer who would like his assistance in the permit application process for a new subdivision in Hartford County. Is that all that we have to work on? Okay. Would this be a violation of the AICP ethics code? Yes, no, or not sure. Okay. No. This one, it feels like you have to read something into it. You have to make some assumption about what is he doing? Is he doing something contrary to a past decision, or is he just doing work for somebody else? So several not sures, recognizing that the case doesn't give us a ton of information to work with. Question number 2, what ethical concerns should Sam have? So we've talked about rule number 3 a bit in the past, that changing positions. What about illegal conduct, confidential information, conflict of interest? All of those, none of those, some of those, and you can pick multiple things, I think, on this next query. I like how all and none came out right at the beginning. And I'm guessing the nuns are kind of thinking, well, it depends. And I'm guessing that the alls are thinking kind of, it depends, but like you should be aware of all of these things. Conflict of interest coming out highest. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's probably the easiest, most straightforward, not easiest, but like most straightforward of changing employers. Like, how do you avoid having a conflict of interest? You're with a new position or new employer, doing some new work, but how do you avoid having that conflict of interest? And as many of us talk about in our jobs, not just having a direct financial conflict of interest, say that you get paid by somebody else or you own property, but also how do you avoid that appearance of conflict of interest, which may not have a legal issue, but it helps maintain the integrity of the profession. That we want planners, as a group, we want planners to be respected in our communities as people that avoid these conflicts of interest, that are impartial, that have professional judgment. And so being able to maintain that amongst the profession. Let's talk about some of the principles and code. So 1C, special attention to the interrelatedness. So how different decisions and actions that we have interrelate with each other. The independent professional judgment that we have. 2C, avoiding that conflict of interest or even the appearance of conflict. And 3A, protecting and enhancing the integrity of the planning profession. So really, even as we change jobs, wanting people to see professional planners as of having that integrity. Let's go to the code rule of conduct. Rule 2, we don't want to do things that we know are illegal. Okay, check. Let's hope that he hasn't, by changing positions, that he's not doing anything illegal. So whether he should be concerned or not, it kind of depends on your perspective. Hopefully he's not concerned, but it's good to be aware of. 3, we talked about that changing positions within 3 years, and whether there's justification, and is he disclosed that change of positions if possible, if needed. And 7, not using to our personal advantage things that we might have gained from one relationship, and things that might be confidential or result in embarrassment. Here, I wonder a little bit about the wording of the code, that last part, because it could result in embarrassment. I don't know that it's just about embarrassment, and it says or other detrimental to the client. It's like we shouldn't be essentially taking confidential information and then using it to either our advantage or our client's advantage in the future. So the outcomes, Karen, and I know, Karen, you're going to leave here in a few minutes, but
Yeah.
so I want to make sure you have a chance to chime in on these last scenarios. Any thoughts you have about kind of somebody going through that, changing of positions before we get into these outcomes, or if you want to talk about the outcome?
Sure. So I think, it's important to note that the code of ethics does not have a revolving door provision.
There's no time limit.
Yeah, with a specific time limit. As we talked about with the previous, one of the previous scenarios, that there is a a time frame in there for change of positions is for 3 years. And in the update of the code, we talked a lot about, should there be a revolving door time provision as well. So for example, you work for a city, you leave that city and then work for a consulting firm, then a lobbying firm, whatever, and you come back and lobby the same director or elected officials that you just worked for. Should there be a time limit in the code of ethics? And the decision was made that by and large, a lot of local jurisdictions in state and government, so public employers, public agencies will have time limits. At King County, it was 1 year, I think. Jurisdictions have various time limits, and leave it at that. And that the code of ethics should rather talk about, conflict of interest, as Paul mentioned, the sharing of disclosing of confidential information, and sort of the behavioral aspects of that, sort of the tangible aspects of that, rather than a specific time frame.
I'm glad that the ethics officer didn't presume that going to a consulting firm meant being concerned about illegal activity, Karen.
That's right. That's right.
There wasn't that prejudice there.
No
Consulting
prejudice
is inherently has potential legal or illegal questions.
Yeah. And this again, this was a real life, an informal inquiry, not a complaint, but I think in this case had, this is Sam, I couldn't remember if we were dealing with Norm, but Sam in this case had not contacted the ethics officer to get that advice. It could have perhaps turned into a complaint. And so that's important to note, is that the informal inquiries are a really good way to avoid you becoming a case in a future case of the year where there's an actual complaint filed against you. But of course, everything would be scrubbed and no one would know it was you. But
it would always be fun to become a case, but maybe not so much. And here I think some of this relates a little bit differently depending on kind of your level in your career. I mean, if you're younger, earlier in your career, you probably changed jobs. I mean, Karen, I know you were at the county for a very long time, but a lot of people would change jobs, change different cities, change between a city and a county, maybe go to consulting, maybe come back. That's pretty common. Here it was Sam. Sam had been at a high level in his position and then changed and went into consulting. And certainly when at a higher level, more access to confidential information, has been more involved in key decisions that the city or the county, whatever the jurisdiction was. And so at that higher level, there's potentially greater sensitivity to what Sam is kind of taking out the door into a consulting agency.
Yeah. Well, and Paul, with that, I'm going to have to bid adieu as I go talk about ethics to our sister organization, the Canadian Institute of Planners. And I want to thank you, all of you, for your great questions and comments, and really paying attention to the code. And you're in great hands with Paul as he goes through that last scenario and make sure that this session qualifies for your CM credit. So hope to see you all again soon. And again, thank you very much. Well,
Karen, I'm sure you'll be able to tell us next time about what you've learned from the Canadians. They're probably,
I'm excited.
They probably have a better ethics sense than we do. It seems like at least maybe they add that layer of politeness to it, right?
Yeah, I think so. That's what I'm anxious to find out about.
For the rest of you, keep with me. I'll make it worth your time here to just finish out this last section. So we have one more scenario and then just a few things to wrap up with. Scenario 6, Beverly AICP has been working the past few years as a part-time consultant for LNG a large architecture and engineering firm. She's also done some consulting for several other firms in other states. L&G has asked Beverly to become a salaried employee in order to support the firm's application to the federal Paycheck Protection Program. She agrees, even though she doesn't need the benefits of a salaried job. So you might just think a little bit about that. She's a part-time consultant for the firm. They've asked her to become a salaried employee that will help their federal qualifications. Now, a small landscape design firm, Four Seasons, has asked Beverly to be a subconsultant on a subdivision proposal it is submitting to a local government. Even though the project is in a different state, Beverly is concerned she could be violating the code by accepting this subconsulting job since she is now a salaried employee of L&G. She also has some concerns about L&G's PPP loan and whether she may have violated any rules of conduct by accepting this salaried position. Okay, kind of almost an HR type thing, but also kind of that revolving door thing. Does Beverly have an ethical obligation to notify L&G of this job offer? Yes, no, not sure. So if we could pull you and let's go ahead and show them as they're coming in. A lot of people saying yes. And while a no or not sure might be thinking, well, maybe it's not required. It's it kind of falls into that camp of like, it's always good to notify. It's always good to be transparent. So we'll keep going to part two. Should Beverly ask to return to a subconsulting role with L&G in light of her concerns about the PPP loan? And I don't know that I know the answer to this. And I've talked through this a few times, and I still find this to be one of the more confusing ones. So we've got some, let's show and see how it's kind of coming up. A bunch of not sures, good, thank you. Reinforce kind of my not sure feelings about this, but also appreciate that some people see some clarity that like, well, maybe the code does apply here. Maybe there are ways to look at this. So let's take a look at both those principles and rules of conduct. So we have interrelatedness of decisions, conflict of interest, certainly, you know, making it clearer as to, is there a conflict, or informing people of potential conflict, disclosing. Rule number 4 is a key one that applies, of not taking salaried work or as salaried employees not taking other work without that written permission that we talked about early in the session, and having subsequent written permission. So should she talk to her employer about doing that other subconsulting job, and should she get some written permission to do so? That seems pretty clear. The PPP is still, I want to know more about that. Let's talk about the outcomes. So in the real life informal inquiry, Beverly was told that because of her salaried position, she needed to comply with rule number 4. Seems pretty straightforward. She requested and received written permission from L&G to work for Four Seasons Design. Okay, check. So she did what she needed to. She asked about the rules. The rule says you should get written permission. She asked for it and she received it. All worked out well. She also decided to research the federal PPP guidelines to make sure she wasn't violating any laws. So, so that's kind of it. You know, it kind of ends there with like, well, there's this federal program. She researched it. So I guess she did her homework, which as a planner, it's like, well, that's all we can do, right? As opposed to really understanding what do those federal laws require and what do they not. I'm going to go through a few things here real quickly, and then I'm going to close so that I can look at the chat and we can have kind of any follow-up discussion. If you've taken the AICP test recently, or if you're studying for it, you might know some of these character names because they're based upon some of our planning history. In the past, we've had Jane, named after Jane Jacobs. Today we have Beverly, named after Beverly Lorraine Green. Catherine Bauer Wooster. Norm Krumholtz, passed away recently, very influential planner. Adelia Suarez. Sam Colliers, also Colliersville, used in the scenarios. Okay, and one last question for you. How much did you love this presentation? And while the answers here are a bit tongue-in-cheek, we would love your feedback at any time. So please, let me, Karen, Valerie, Nora, or others know kind of what you appreciated. Certainly, we hope that this helped you maintain your CM credits or obtain what you needed for CM certification. But beyond that, I think we'd like these to be as informative and entertaining in the right balance there as possible, and are always looking at ways we can kind of make these better. We hope to be able to do some in person where we can actually hand out candy rather than to ask you a polling question about candy and kind of get your stomachs churning. So appreciate the feedback here. And I'm going to end the sharing and just open it up if there's any other kind of discussion or questions that people have, things that wasn't covered that maybe you wish had been. Anybody want to chime in with any thing that we didn't cover?
We are running a little bit early, so we do have time for a few questions. But I know some of our later presenters also had time commitments right after their presentations are completed. So
Looks like we have a question from Nabil.
Great.
Well, first of all, it was an amazing presentation. I really enjoyed it immensely. It was very polished. It's very engaging also. So thank you so much. It was amazing. One question I would think maybe could be addressed a little bit, and this is something that we cover in our classes, is how do you really define public good in a society that is really diverse and has multiple interests and there are multiple publics, right? So that can become an issue that maybe ethically can face planners to some extent. And at the same time, the tension that may be between the relationship with the employer and the client versus the imperatives of social justice and quote unquote public good.
Yeah. Oh, what an awesome, let's just redo the whole session and talk about that one question, Nabil. Because I think that's really wonderful. And I saw that, it came up in that ADU case. Public good, like what is it? And then it's often changing, or at least our perception of it is often changing. I think back, just to the debate people are having about zoning. We as planners enacted zoning generally kind of in the 1950s as a way to prevent one impacting use, like an industrial use, from impacting, say, a residential use. That seems like it's in the public good, right? And yet we also know that zoning has been used in ways that really are to kind of like protect the haves versus the have-nots. So it's not necessarily always good. And I think we're continuing to kind of learn. The other thing that I come across all the time, I think we do is both within the public side, but also on the consulting side, is picking and choosing policies. The comp plan has 158 policies in it, and you will come across a issue, a project the city wants to do, or maybe a consultant wants to propose something. And they'll say, yeah, it's consistent with the comp plan. Look at these 10 policies that it supports. But what about the other 10 that it's totally, not inconsistent with? And how do we as planners make those, work through those decisions? Nabil, what do you think about that question?
Well, first, if we, I would say that we should recognize that the planners operate in a politicized environment.
Yeah.
And so my position is personal. So my position is that there is a certain level of ethics and values that planners should abide by, and that revolve around issues like you mentioned at the very beginning of your presentation, questions of fairness and equity and justice. And that should, in my opinion, supersede the relationship to the client or the relationship to the employer and the relationship to more privileged publics.
Yeah, great comments, Nabil. Anybody else want to?
And I'm sorry, I have to leave because I'm going to class.
Thanks, Nabil.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions or comments people would like to raise? Well, I want to thank you all for your time this morning. Hopefully, while we were presenting, you were mentally engaged and maybe you had a chance to get some coffee, drink some coffee while we were presenting so that you're queued up for the next sessions here. It's, I always enjoyed kind of getting to like the Southwest, the Northwest section meetings every once in a while and kind of just seeing people in the different regions. So this is via Zoom. I get to see a bunch of your names. I saw Ian's name. Ian, I'm glad that you're out there. Miss you in our Pierce County conversations. You can just imagine. But glad to be with you all this morning and hope you continue to have a good session for the rest of the section meeting. Thanks, Nora.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks to Karen too. I'll have to follow up. Thank you to her after the session. Our next presenters are Sharon Mativa and Laura Ives from the Economic Development Administration. Hi, Laura. And they're going to be talking about comprehensive economic development strategies and other EDA planning programs.
Hi, good morning. As Nora mentioned, I'm Laura Ives with the U.S. Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration. I'm the representative for Washington, and I'm joined by my colleague, Sharon Mativa. And I'll have her introduce herself in just a moment, but I did want to say that Sharon is our expert on all things CEDS, so I'm really grateful to have her here today. By way of a quick introduction to EDA, for those of you who aren't familiar, we are a small, pretty nimble agency within the U.S. Department of Commerce that provides a big impact by helping to make it easier for businesses to start and grow in the United States. And we do this by working hand in hand with local development partners to advance their locally developed projects. We do this by providing grants for projects that are tied to the region's long-term sustainable economic development strategy. So in essence, EDA provides grants to non-federal governments, including tribes, as well as nonprofits in areas suffering from economic distress. So today we're going to talk about CEDS, which stands for Comprehensive Economic Development Strategies, which are a critical part of the foundational work that we do at EDA. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Sharon to introduce herself and give our CEDS presentation. And Sharon, while you're introducing yourself, I'll go ahead and pull up the presentation.
Thank you, Laura. Super. I am Sharon Mativa. I have been with the Economic Development Administration for quite some time, since roughly over 10 years. I have worked in planning for that length of time as well. And also I am the POC, or the project officer, for Washington State. So the CEDS is a cornerstone of EDA and a major component in that it is a strategic plan. So we have about, I think around 6 or 8 slides, not very many. So to give you a broad, hopefully an approach or an idea of what the CEDS is and what it means to EDA and to all our clients as well. So starting off with CEDS at a glance. There are 5 bullets here, and this is kind of what the CEDS does in a nutshell. There's more to it than this, but at least this gives you a broad overview. It helps to build on the strengths of your region, as well as identifying gaps in resources or expertise that needs to be addressed. The CEDS also is a planning process. It facilitates regional collaboration, supply chains, industry clusters. It's also an area where, on the third bullet, that once the CEDS strategy is in place, there is a section for a project list. And in this list, it identifies the various types of projects for the community. It could be infrastructure, or it could be a feasibility study. And in this area, you're able to see, okay, this is one of the elements that will, if you will, support what the strategy is for the region in terms of time. On the fourth bullet, it talks about how the CEDS can be more resilient. And that has a bigger, broader brush in as you delve deeper into the strategy. And the resilient component is talking about economic resilience. On the fifth bullet, it talks about the CEDS should not be static. In other words, it shouldn't just, you develop something, say, yeah, we have it, and it sits around for another decade or so, and it's not viewed. It should be a living thing. It should be a strategic plan of sorts that the planning team or the community can engage in. And there is a section to do that also. Next slide, please. So in one paragraph, and I'm sure you guys can read this, what this is saying, it is this strategic plan is not something that should just be done within a team of people. Yes, you do have a team to develop it, but it should be community driven. In other words, depending on the community, if it's a rural community, your farmers, your town council, your private business, all of those folks come together to design this. And so, in other words, it says it's a locally based, regionally driven economic planning process. Everyone gets to have their say, whether it's positive or can be challenging. Next slide, please. Why a strategy? And this is really key. It says, and I'll read a component of it. It's an effective CEDS allows a region to maximize its economic development potential, as well as engage with other districts, federal partners, to receive infrastructure, technical assistance, public works, and other economic adjustment programs. In other words, because it's community driven, what this is saying is that because also dollars are how do you say, not in flourish supply, broad supply. If a community comes together and you partner with everybody, it benefits the whole. So for example, an infrastructure that not just benefits the small community, it could have outlying positives to having the infrastructure area. And this is where the plan comes into place. Next slide, please. My apologies. Community engagement. Community engagement it means different things to different people. But in the CEDS, it talks about, as a CEDS, it talks about locally driven. And community engagement, it really is key, because when you're talking to maybe the farmer who's having a problem with getting supplies to market, you have an opportunity to become creative. It could mean creating a farmer's market, or it could mean getting his stuff in some sort of transportation efforts to market, or even internationally. So it says, as at the regional or community level, economic development practitioners are instrumental in building the capacity for economic resilience. Economic development professionals and organizations often become the focal point for post-incident coordination, information dissemination, responding to external inquiries, and the lead grant administrator for federally funded recovery initiatives. This is a mouthful. In other words, there's always a point of contact to lead the economic engagement output, or what type of project that you're fostering. It also, in the second bullet, talks about economic resilience. And this has become one of the most engaging and focal point on what it means to have a comprehensive economic development strategy. As we are seeing, and most everyone can talk about the current pandemic and how CEDS relates. There's so many agencies pivoting, so many communities pivoting. One of the key aspects of this is the CEDS allow you, how do you say, a jumping off point, a standing point to say, okay, how can we effectively launch something to recover? We're seeing economic resilience in terms of getting our folks healthy in order to keep our communities thriving. It's really one of the areas that EDA is also focusing on for expansion development, to really define how you are economically recovering from, whether it's natural disasters, not exactly sure in your area, in the area what the biggest disaster would be, but it could be flooding. And how do you become better? What are some of the areas that could be a FEMA supported program help? And in some cases, after FEMA is done, who can best facilitate some of the, could be a project, but best facilitate how your community re-engage. The third bullet says the steady state initiatives. And it really means that what are some of the components that continue to drive economic development. Next slide, please. We're almost to the end of this, and these 4 bullets really mean that economic development is not static. You're engaging with other federal partners, as EDA does. We have our EDI position, which does network with all of the other agencies, USDA, EPA, HUD, et cetera, to bring about what some of the components for economic development means. Your local government, your mayors, city planners, your departments of commerce, I meant chambers of commerce, your private sectors. It could be a small one in your private entity, somebody who owns a private business, and your emergency centers. This is really key too, because of, once again, we're seeing how this pandemic has, how do you say, broadened? It has stretched, not just inside of the US, it is practically global. And so your emergency centers, you're coordinating with them to find out where the breakdown is. You know, for example, at this point we're seeing, and we can speak to this most current one, instead of going through something more difficult as a FEMA response. some folks are saying, okay, what would be best to mitigate the situation so we can get our workers back? So we're coordinating with our health centers to see, okay, what's the best policy and plan? Next slide, please. Okay, this is one key element, and this is one of the reasons we put this in there. The SWOT section and a couple of additional sections there are required, is a must-have. The summary background, it talks about your geography, your local area. It describes who you are. The SWOT is, it's kind of a type of survey or analysis of where you were and where do you want to go. The strategic direction and action plan is outlining, when it says how do you get there, it could be, what are your vision and goals for your community? And it could outline the basic tenets of it. The evaluation is an approach EDA is using to say, okay, how successful are you? Maybe this wasn't a good approach, or maybe this was a good approach. And you're saying, okay, because in the long run, what you don't want to do is duplicate efforts. So once you've tried it and say you've spent a ton of money on this thing and it doesn't work, then what? You're not as happy. So what you're saying is be very diligent and careful how you get to the next steps. And lastly, resilience. I think I've talked about this from the very beginning. And here it is again towards the end of this presentation, where it says it responds to the changing environment and sustainability. How do you embrace the changes that are occurring? And that's one of the reasons why the CEDS is in place, not as a static document. It doesn't sit on a shelf. It continues to evolve as the community continues to engage in how you're getting your area to be prosperous, or even to meet the basic needs of the region. Next slide, please. And I think we're just about done. NATO is one of our partners, and we refer to NATO many times for CEDS development, a lot of other economic development meetings, presentations, webinars, because it's nationwide. They collect information as well from other EDA regions and other economic development partners. And we refer to NATO as some sort of information gathering, but it does get they reach the length and breadth of economic development partners. And I think the next slide may be ending our presentation. And with that, if you have questions, comments, concerns, curiosities about our EDA program, please ask.
Sharon, would you be willing to speak to how to apply for a CEDS grant through EDA, or what that planning program looks like?
Absolutely. So the CEDS program it's a planning program that's funded by, it's in statute. Let me go back and say the planning program is in statute, means it's EDA has a 13 CFR. It's funded as long as we're around. It's funded by Congress. So the eligible entities, and there's eligible entities, tribes, nonprofit organizations, districts, cities, counties are eligible. And you will submit an application through grants.gov for this opportunity. The hope is we have a field agent, and Ms. Laura will be able to guide you into how to submit the application for this type of strategic document. A little bit more detailed, it is no more than 12 months. You develop this document with the community. It's also, if it's a tribe, it's 100% funded. Without getting into details to tell you the nuts and bolts of every nuance of it, I give you a broad brush.
Thank you.
Any more questions, comments? Would you like to know?
I have a question about the current funding opportunities authorized through ARPA.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about what opportunities are available to our members here in the Northwest right now? Because I think it's kind of like a rolling deadline, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Laura,
Sharon, do you want me
you want
to
to
talk about
take
that?
first
Yeah.
crack?
Yeah, absolutely. So through the American Rescue Plan, EDA was allocated $3 billion. And that is being disseminated through 6 individual programs. The deadline for one of those programs has passed. So there are 5 remaining programs, and really kind of 3, there are 2 remaining national challenges and 3 remaining regional challenges. And the regional challenges where you are competing with other applicants in the Seattle regional office, which includes 8 Western states and territories. But we have an extension of our regular economic adjustment assistance program. We have additional funding through that program, and that's our most flexible program where we fund construction, non-construction projects. We also have an opportunity focused on the travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation industries. And then the last one is the Indigenous Communities Challenge. And so to be eligible to apply for that, you must be a federally recognized tribe or tribal enterprise. But those 3 are competitive programs. And if you are interested in learning more about any of them, our website has a lot of great information. We have done webinars for every single one of those programs, a lot of FAQs provided, one-pagers. You're certainly welcome to reach out to me if you think you have a project that you're interested in receiving funding for. So there is a lot of information out there. I encourage you, if you have questions, to check out the individual notice of funding opportunities, and then to reach out to me or your economic development district. If you have a project that you think might be a good fit for one of those funding opportunities. So again, due to the amount of information, it's a little bit difficult to really dive in on this call, but if folks have specific questions, I'm certainly happy to speak to them.
I see a comment in here in the chat from Tammy saying that in Whatcom County, the Port of Bellingham is the ADO. Tammy, do you have any additional information on that? I'm kind of wondering if that is a commonplace thing to see ports acting as ADOs.
No, actually, so I was really surprised when I learned. So it's Jennifer Novick, who is the person in our county who is in charge of writing the CEDS. Of course, she coordinates with lots of other people. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I was really surprised. So I think there's only 2 other ports in Washington that their act is that authority, I guess, to write the CEDS. Otherwise, it's usually a county entity. So that was just something I learned as an aside on a different project I was working on. So I don't know, Laura, if you have other, how prominent or prevalent it is that entities outside of government, local governments. I mean, of course, ports are government as well. But anyway, that was something I learned recently and I found pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Laura, can I take this one?
Yes.
So we have a variety, it depends. Let me back up and say that. It depends on the district and or the community. We have a number of ADOs that are part of the districts and a part of district boards who engage in the CEDS development. They could be on the strategy committee. So it just depends on what the composition is of the district, because it's mostly ADOs that are partnering with districts, also the ports, because of the workforce and what the ports do bring to the area. So it just depends. It's not one size fits all on the whoever community develops the sets. And I see that you have also worked with Clearwater EDA. They are, I'm not exactly familiar with their board, but if they do have the ADO on the board, part of their membership will be more than likely facilitating the development of the sets. Does that help?
Yeah, great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? That was a really interesting presentation. I really enjoyed that.
I will add one more thing. For additional, as Laura said, EDA.gov, there's so much information there right now. I mean, you could be a little bit overwhelmed at times, but you could Google, you can type in ARPA, and there is a section, oh, I thought I could share that, but there is one of the elements of the EDA website, it has programs, and you could click on those links. And I don't think Laura and I would have enough time just to go through every one of those, but if you visit the website and jump on that, take a quick view and reach out to Laura or myself, but preferably Laura first. Lots of information. And especially for the ARPA, I would strongly encourage you all to reach out to her to engage, if it's just mildly to ask questions or to submit a project.
And I went ahead and put the website that'll take you directly to the ARPA programs. And maybe if it makes sense, I can share my screen again and just walk you through how to navigate that. If you're interested. Okay, so EDA.gov is our website, EDA.gov/ARPA. / will take you to the EDA American Rescue Plan programs. And you can see over here on the left-hand side, overview, which is the page that we are on. You can see then here the list of the programs. The Build Back Better Regional Challenge is the challenge that the initial deadline has passed, but you can still learn about it. We have the Good Jobs Challenge, which is a national challenge, is a deadline coming up in January. Then the 3 challenges that I mentioned, the economic adjustment assistance, the indigenous communities, and the travel tourism and outdoor recreation, those applications we're receiving on a rolling basis. There's a suggested deadline of March, but if you're interested, you want to move, quickly, if you have a shovel-ready project or something you think you could put together really quickly, definitely reach out and we can talk through any of those. But if you click on any one of these, for instance, down here at the bottom of each page, program resources, and you're going to have access to the NOS funding opportunity, frequently asked questions, the webinar that was provided by our headquarters team, copy of the slides, and then a 1-pager. So like Sharon said, there's a lot of information, there's a lot to go through, but hopefully that gives you just an idea of how to at least begin navigating that information. So really encourage you to focus specifically on those program resources. And then I put my contact information in the chat, so you can certainly reach out with any questions.
Thanks, Laura. Our next presenter is actually from the Port of Skagit. I saw that Katie Bungie put in the chat a note that SCOG has historically been the lead agency for the Skagit County CEDS. So Sarah might be able to answer some questions about the Skagit County CEDS, but she's going to be talking today mainly about some recent successful planning projects related to the airport here at the Port of Skagit. Hi, Sarah.
Well, hi, everybody. I have 3 different screens here plus Zoom, so I'm going to share my screen, and I hope you can see it. Hang on. Can you see that?
Yep, looks great.
And I can still see you, so this is good. Well, good morning. Yes, that was a very interesting presentation. I am 95% confident that the ADO, EDASC, and our community did the CEDS update the last time it was done, but it's terribly out of date in Skagit County and a real high priority for us to get it going again. So it's probably a conversation we'll start with our partners in the community again. Our last CEDS was a really wonderful guidance document. We've referred to it many times, but it's time to get it done again. So that was a really good presentation for us to hear as well. I'm Sarah Young. I've been with the Port of Skagit a long time, about 14 years. In September, I took over as the executive director, so I'm in a different seat on the bus now. My colleague, Heather Rogerson, is on the call as well. And Heather is our director of planning and development, and she's also our aviation director. So I'm going to give you a presentation here, and then we can just have a conversation, take any questions, and Heather can tag team with me on that. She's handling a lot of these matters right now for the port. Let's see. So, oh, now I have to figure out which one of these screens I'm trying to move. Okay. I wanted to give you just a little bit of background on ports in general, a little bit of context, because I really like context, and I'm sorry about wordy slides, but so it is. So ports are authorized in the state of Washington under RCW 53, and they're actually, we are actually the only agency in Washington state whose primary purpose is economic development, the only governmental entity that truly has that as our only purpose. So these are our powers. We can do economic development. We can buy land for industrial or commercial purposes. We can improve that land. We can develop terminals, marine terminals, airports, trucking and rail terminals, anything that moves cargo and passengers. We can do environmental work. We can do pollution control facilities. We can do trade centers and export companies. We can have foreign trade zones. Again, we do lots of environmental work. Typically, we're at that intersection between commerce and environment. We can do marinas. We can operate and build marinas. We can lease those marinas to vendors. We can have public access boating facilities. We can do tourism because that has an economic stimulus effect in our communities. And the last and most recent power that we have is to do broadband infrastructure. We can lease that infrastructure for within or outside of our district for the benefit of our district. So ports do lots of different things. And the Port of Skagit is involved in some of those activities. So I like to think of ports in kind of 2 large pots. There are ports that do real estate, and there are ports that do terminals. And those 2 things can intersect, but we're primarily a real estate port. We have a large real estate portfolio on many different properties. We have an airport, which we're going to talk about today. We have a marina in LaConner. We have industrial properties up here on Bayview Ridge and in LaConner. We have a rail yard in Conway, which was under lease continuously for about 50 years to a coal company and is now currently back in port possession. We're doing a reuse study for that property now to figure out how we want to use that rail siding. You may or may not know that we acquired title to the old Northern State Mental Hospital property in Cedar Woolley and have retooled that as the Swift Center now and are working on repurposing that property for community benefit, including economic development and also public access. And we are heavily involved in fiber optics in our community, particularly in rural areas. We have roughly 100 tenants on our properties now and about 1,700 jobs. We really focus on the wage of those jobs because that's important to the quality of life here. So here's just a quick summary of the average annual wage that we have on our properties. It's close to $85,000 per year for management positions, close to $50,000 a year for skilled positions, and a little less than that for unskilled. We've really looked at what it takes in our community wage-wise to have kind of a healthy community. And the average wage that we would like to see in this community is about $70,000 per year. So we're always trying to look at the quality of those jobs that come in when we're bringing in businesses. So this is just kind of a rough look at the properties we have and where they are in the property. Here's that little pool yard down in Conway in South Skagit County, the Lacana Marina. Up here on Bayview Ridge, we have the Skagit Regional Airport property and also Bayview Business Park, which is our existing established business park. It's the industrial properties around the airport. And then we have a new property we purchased a few years ago that is not developed at this time, but we are going to be developing that as Watershed Business Park in the next 5 years or so. And Swift Center's over here in Cedar Woolley. So we do planning at the port. We do kind of our own type of planning, I guess. We do lots of strategic planning to set our direction and try to refine and focus how we're going to use our resources. We do a lot of master planning. We have, again, a lot of real estate, and we have to think about the capital improvement program for those properties. So there's a lot of work that goes into master planning our properties. That gets distilled down into capital project planning and 6-year CIP kinds of plans. We're not the land use jurisdiction, that's the county for most of our properties, but we definitely engage in that process. We'll talk a little bit more about Skagit Regional Airport and the Airport Environments Protection Code, which is the Skagit County code, but the Port of Skagit's heavily involved in helping to craft and oversee the implementation of that code. And then we do business planning. We're a port. Ports are kind of we're an interesting animal. We're sort of a hybrid. We're governmental, we have taxing authority, but we also have this kind of enterprise function where we really need to be raising and generating revenues to sustain ourselves. That's one of the biggest tools we have in the toolbox. And so we have to operate in kind of a business-like fashion and make sure that the investments we're making are going to yield a good return for the taxpayer and for the community and are going to help us continue to sustain and proliferate our work. So we do a fair amount of business planning. Just a really simple mission statement, good jobs for the Skagit Valley. We refined that from jobs for the community some years ago to try to reflect that we're really not after just any job. We really want to try to continue to push those wages up and bring interesting jobs into the community that people will want to do. So just kind of a quick look at how airports are an economic development engine. There are jobs directly on this airport, but the primary function of Skagit Regional Airport is to be a transportation asset. Lots of different things happen here. There's business aviation, so it's that airport terminal. There's lots of commerce that comes through the airport into our community, kind of the on and off ramp into our community from the skies. We have small businesses here. We have 2 different flight schools. We have a large FBO and an aircraft, a small business that is an aircraft mechanic business. So there's a lot of just small business activity that happens on the airport. Visitor spending, we definitely see a peak in the use of the airport in the summertime. So this is a tourism asset as well. So just kind of a quick look at that. Nationally, airports are responsible for about $150 billion in annual economic output and 1.2 million jobs. And that's general aviation airport. So Skagit Regional Airport, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is a general aviation airport. It's not a commercial service airport. So it's not like SeaTac. We are the rest of aviation, and actually general aviation is about 95% of all aviation. So just kind of wanted to give you a brief history of the airport. I guess because I think it's interesting. But this airport started out as a works progress administration project in the 1930s. And I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this is the back taxiway. And that is the original airstrip that was built, just a one strip grass runway in the 1930s with the works progress administration. And then in World War II, the military came in and built the triangular configuration that is the current airport that we know now. After the war, the airport was deeded to local government, originally to Skagit County in the 1950s. Then in the 60s, the county deeded it to the joint ownership of the Port of Skagit and the Port of Anacortes. And finally, in 1975, the Port of Anacortes divested of the airport and it became the sole asset of the Port of Skagit. So that is Skagit Regional Airport. When the land was deeded to local government in the 1950s, it came with some strings attached, and we continue to live under those provisions today. So the strings attached will protect the airport, will protect the airspace around it, will make sure that the approaches to the airport remain clear of obstacles. The United States government retains the right to land on this airport without any charges. We don't actually charge anybody to land on the airport, but they have the right to land here with no charge. It's a non-exclusive right. During a national emergency, they can commandeer the airport and they can use it exclusively as needed. We, as the current airport sponsor, do not have the right to grant any other entity exclusive control of the airport or any part of it. And that gets into fairness. So if we have a company that wants to come here to the airport and sell fuel, for example, we do not have the right to do an exclusive deal with them and say, only you may sell fuel at Skagit Regional Airport, or only you may land at Skagit Regional Airport, or only you may build hangars at Skagit Regional Airport. It has to be non-discriminatory. So we can't give anybody exclusive control. If we transfer this property in any way, shape, or form, we have to have the permission of the United States government, and we have to carry these provisions with it. It has to be transferred, any piece of it has to be transferred for aeronautical purposes, unless we can demonstrate that it's not necessary, that that piece of property is not necessary for aeronautical purposes to have a fully functioning airport. And then we can petition the FAA to surplus the property. And we've actually done that twice, both times for PACCAR. And then finally, the federal government retains no liability when they transfer the property to local government. I always find that a little bit amusing. We haven't found the cache of 50-gallon drums yet, so I think they left it in pretty clean condition. Just an overview of the airport as it stands today. And this is, I think, what we really want to talk about today is kind of how have we come to where we are today? That this airport, it had this sordid history of finally landing with the Port of Skagit in the 70s. There was some development between the 70s and kind of that early 2000s timeframe, but it was slow and it was kind of, I guess it just was lacking planning. In 2007, we finished our last master plan update prior to the one we're in right now. And there was kind of this new energy to think about what this asset should be used for. Lots of discussion with our airport community here. So we started moving forward, and that process has looked like really establishing the policies that we need to have the airport we have today. Lots of planning, master planning, conceptual planning, and some business planning. Big investment by both the Port of Skagit and the FAA and the airport over many years. And then culture a little bit. That's something that the port really prides ourselves on. We have kind of a business-friendly climate here, but we also have a really community-oriented climate here, and we have a culture that really drives towards getting things done and trying to think about the greater good. So I think that's been an important part of how we've been successful in moving the airport forward. So this is a rough timeline on how we've kind of moved through a whole planning cycle from one master plan to the next. Like I said, we finished our master plan in 2007, and it was a very civil engineering based master plan. It was a really good guidance document to figure out what kinds of investments needed to be made on the airport to just maintain it and improve it as needed as air traffic grows here. But it didn't really have any vision behind it. That's kind of how the FAA functions. They're really kind of focused down on the infrastructure and don't necessarily think about the airport itself as a business asset or an enterprise or a community asset in a way that might require a little bit more strategic planning. So our airport community kind of forced our hand on that. They came to us and really wanted the port administration to think about the airport differently. So we had a roundtable. We met offsite at Bow Lodge and had a whole day of discussion, facilitated discussion with the airport community here, and really came out of that understanding that this asset is an economic driver, and it has all of the ingredients necessary to be a business aviation hub. And when you think about the airspace system in this region, we have commercial service airports. We have SeaTac, we have Bellingham, Painfield just came online. There's a lot of recreational flying that happens at Arlington Airport, which is a real similar airport to ours. Arlington also has some business aviation and quite a bit of industrial going on now. But we saw that there was sort of a niche for the Port of Skagit and Skagit Regional Airport, in that after 9/11, Homeland Security requirements have made it a little bit difficult to get in and out of commercial service airports. It's just inefficient. And so from a business perspective, if we can have a lot of airport here, lots of, we have a long runway, we have a lot of space, we've done a pretty good job of airport protection. And so we have an asset here that's pretty ideally suited to be a place for business to happen in Skagit County and in this region. So that was kind of the beginning of the vision. Spent some time doing some new strategic planning around that, created a new vision, worked with some folks who are not traditional civil engineering or FAA-based master planners, but are more landscape architect types that can really think about how you make good use of space, and created a new conceptual master plan for the property, or a new conceptual vision for the property. And then started to work on it. And over the last 10 years or so, we've had almost $20 million, maybe a little bit over 20 million at this point, from the FAA funded the Airport Improvement Fund to really take the airport to the next level. And then we started a new master plan cycle. And so that master plan cycle was kind of the final step in incorporating that conceptual plan and really saying, okay, this is the airport that we want to be. So I don't know if anybody's a hockey fan, but instead of focusing on where the puck is, we want to start thinking about where the puck is going and how we can get there. Because we're talking about economic development, I just wanted to provide kind of an interpretation of that works for the port. So this would be the process by which the economic well-being and quality of life of a nation, region, local community, or an individual are improved according to targeted goals and objectives. And that's kind of a theme. Whenever the port makes an investment in infrastructure, or it may be some kind of a community initiative, to some extent, we're picking winners and losers. We only have so much capital. We have to make good decisions about where that goes. And so thinking about kind of what is that bigger picture, and what is the community we're trying to create, and how are we measuring success is pretty important to us. Here's another kind of fuzzy way to think about things. As we started to figure out how we wanted to move forward with the airport, we had to do some strategic planning. We had to think about what our strategy was going to be. So these are just some different definitions of strategy. And the first one is kind of a businessy perspective. This is the Michael Porter perspective of the creation of a unique and valuable position involving a different set of activities. So that's kind of where we had to think, we want to be a business airport and we want to some extent, differentiate ourselves from other airports in this region. So we can be really focused on what's going to bring value to the airspace system as a whole, and particularly to our community. And so what do we have to do differently to get there? A plan of action or policy designed to achieve a major or overall aim. That's really traditional planning. That's kind of what we all do. And then my favorite is just deciding what not to do. I don't know about all of you, but at the port, I really feel like our bigger task is to decide what we're not going to do. You know, we're right on the I-5 corridor between Seattle and Vancouver, BC. We have a beautiful community. We have all kinds of wonderful natural resources. We have a lot of opportunity that comes cruising by our front door every day. And it's really incumbent on us to be careful and think about how we want to make investments and where we're trying to go with this community. So deciding what not to do is kind of a key piece of how we move the airport forward. So this is our vision statement today, and it's pretty broad. Skagit Regional Airport is an integral part of the region's transportation system, connecting Skagit County to the world. But it helps guide our work in a couple of different ways. One, it just recognizes that fundamentally, at its core, Skagit Regional Airport is a transportation asset. It's not that different than I-5. And because of that, it has this inherent economic value. The fact that we can connect Skagit County to the world, that we can actually use this asset to do commerce in and out of Skagit County, really helps us think about what do we need next in order to be, you know, sort of in order to have that purpose in an unconstrained way, which is kind of a word salad, but specifically, we boiled it down to 3 ingredients that we really felt like we need at this airport. And one of those ingredients is that we need a customs presence. We did not have US Customs and Border Protection at this airport, which means it's very difficult to come in and out of the airport. It requires an intermediate stop. Hang on. Just came back from a conference. I'm going to lose my voice. So ingredient number 1 was a customs presence, so that you could just, this would be a port of entry. Ingredient number 2 is large hangars. We have large business jets that come and use this airport right now, but we did not have anywhere where those aircraft could be stored overnight, or anywhere where those aircraft could be housed as a based aircraft. And we like the idea that as Boeing Field becomes more crowded, as air traffic becomes busier and more complex in the Puget Sound region, that actually Skagit Regional Airport could be a really nice place to house your business. So your pilot could have the wonderful quality of life of living in Skagit County, and then could get in that airplane and go pick you up at Boeing Field if some of that business needs to happen down south. So large hangars, second ingredient. Third ingredient, a longer runway. So our runway is roughly 5,500 feet long right now. And that's a pretty good runway. The largest business jets that we ever anticipate coming to Skagit Regional Airport can come here right now. But they cannot leave with a full load of fuel because the weight of the aircraft has a relationship to the length of the runway that's required. So the largest transcontinental business jets that come to Skagit right now have to leave here with a partial load of fuel, go do an intermediate refueling stop, and then go from there. So a truly unconstrained use of this airport would be to have a runway that's about 1,500 feet longer. So those aircraft can leave here and literally do commerce in Europe or Asia directly from Skagit County. So that's pretty exciting to us. So here's kind of our policy environment. And some of this is just makes sense. You need rules and regulations to have an orderly operation. Minimum standards for commercial operators is something that's actually prescribed by the FAA, and that goes to that non-exclusive use of the airport. And basically, they require that we have a fair playing field. So we have to set the standards and say, if you meet these standards, you can come do business with us, presuming that we have the land available for you. But we've really tried to take those minimum standards and think about how we can use them to drive the airport that we want to have. And one of our most significant policies that differentiates us a bit from other airports in the area is that we require, if you're going to sell fuel at Skagit Regional Airport, you have to be a full service FBO. And FBO is an arcane term of art from the aviation industry, but it stands for fixed base operator, and it just means that you're a service provider on the airport. So you have to be a full service operator. You need to have facilities that include pilot lounges, pilot briefing rooms, mechanical services, avionics services. You need to have line staff. You need to pay trained personnel to be present 12 hours a day, every day, to meet aircraft when they come to the airport. So there's a really high bar of services that you have to provide before the port will grant you a license to sell fuel here. And we do that because it's really important to us that we have those services on the airport. And that's not the port's work to do. We're not going to provide those services directly, but it's an opportunity for a business to do that. And so if you can have all of those full suite of services, if you can make sure that there are rental cars available or loaner cars available, all of those things that drive up the cost of that business to operate, in return, you can sell fuel here. So that's been a pretty key policy for us. Another key policy, we have construction standards. We learned pretty early on that the property on this airport is really precious. We talk about it as waterfront property, and so it's important that it's developed appropriately, that the quality of construction is high. And so if you are getting a 50-year lease to build a building on this property, you need to build a building that is a 50-year building. Beyond that, it's a really simple concept, but we talk about those large hangars. So an objective was that we want to have large hangars on this airport. So we made a policy that you have to build hangars of a certain size on our primary flight line, and that the doors have to be a certain size, they have to be so tall, so that effectively you can't build anything into that structure that's going to limit the use of the structure. We don't want to be in a situation where you have a large hangar where theoretically you could park a Gulfstream 650, but because the door height is a little too short, actually you can't get that airplane in there. Those are the kinds of things that happen all the time, and we've kind of learned those hard lessons over the years. So when we put our construction standards together, we say we need private investment on this airport to be according to the port's plan, and make sure that we get the large hangars constructed here that we need to realize that vision. Our leasing policy is designed to realize that vision. So we maximize the terms of leases that we can do here. We used to do shorter leases. Now, according to the FAA, we have limits on how long we can lease property, but we typically lease airport property for 50 years. That's a 30-year base lease with 2 10-year options. And then we have a leasing policy that encourages reinvestment. So it's not our objective at the end of that lease term to take the building back, to eliminate that lease or that business from the airport. It's our objective to see them reinvest in the property and get that lease going again. So we will renew leases if there is commensurate reinvestment from the private sector. So second kind of level of planning is working with Skagit County. This is some of that advocacy work, and I think I'm not going to read this to you because it's torturous. But basically, Skagit County has a section in their zoning code, the Airport Environs Overlay, it's section 1416-201, and it governs what you can do in the airport environs, and that's what this overlay zone is. And the idea is that we want to preserve the functionality of the airport. We don't want to allow any kind of land use near the airport that's going to constrain the use of the airport. We also want to keep people safe who live near the airport, or we have a school near the airport. So we govern what can happen in and around the airport in a way that's based on these compatibility zones. So you can see the numbers here. And the zones have to do with some statistical data that deals with the probability that an accident could happen anywhere near the airport. It's more likely that if you were to have an aircraft incident or accident, it would happen very close on approach or departure from the airport. So there's a lot of restrictions. Basically, you can't do anything in zone 1. Turning radiuses around the airport have more restrictive requirements. And then you get out to zone 6, which is the traffic pattern. And you do have air traffic in that area, but it's very low probability that anything will go wrong. And so there are fewer restrictions out there. The code also requires that anybody who's going to do development work within the airport environments overlay has to sign abrogation easements and notice to purchasers. And you guys are pros at this sort of thing, but we definitely want people to know that they are siting and locating themselves within proximity to an airport. And we want to have that kind of legal quilt that we're weaving together over this flight zone around the airport through these abrogation easements that make sure everybody knows we have a right to the airspace here and that the airport can continue operating. So from county planning requirements, we go to FAA planning requirements. The FAA has an advisory circular, which I will not cite here, but we are required as an airport that was granted this property from the federal government. We continue to take federal funding for the airport, and that comes with those strings attached. And one of those strings is that we will do this master planning according to the FAA's prescription. And Heather has led this effort over the last couple of years. We're just on the cusp of approving the master plan. And probably the key thing here, and kind of come back to it at the end, but it's a 1,500-foot runway extension to realize that kind of last piece of the puzzle in those ingredients that we need to realize the vision. We're also planning for quite a bit of new hangar development in the future, and the size of those hangars is, again, part of our master plan. It's part of our vision that we need those larger hangars here on our primary runway. This is the primary runway, incidentally. This is the crosswind runway. And here's that original Works Progress Administration runway, which is now a taxiway. But anyway, so this master plan works backward and brings that conceptual master plan and that vision into the civil engineering planning environment that the FAA understands, so we can actually get these projects built. So we've put a lot of infrastructure investment into the airport over the last, say, 15 years, close to 20 years at this point. And the first thing that happened was we got this thing called a WAAS. And the WAAS stands for Wide Area Augmentation System, and it's just a GPS-based navigation system for precision approach. It used to be that these precision approach systems were based on a land-based infrastructure, and we happened to be kind of at the cutting edge, because at the moment that we were ready to go to precision approach, the FAA said, we don't want to invest in these land-based systems anymore. So we're going to make you guys kind of a pilot project for a WAAS system. So one of the things that really drove the airport's future was that early on, before we even really had a vision for what we wanted to do here, we got this GPS-based navigation system, and that really helped open us up to business traffic and large jet traffic. We've put a lot of funding into this airport. Like I said, it's about $20 million over the last 10 years. Completely rebuilt the runway to current standards for large business jets. Rebuilt the safety areas. So these are safety areas, graded them so that they all meet the specifications for the largest business jets coming into the airport on approach. We got customs. So this is our little custom space. There's a box out here on the ramp where large jets can park while they wait for customs personnel to come out and service them. This is a reimbursable services agreement. So it's actually kind of a nice enterprising offering of the federal government now. It used to be that customs would sort of determine where they wanted to be, and that was the end of the story. Now we applied for and received a reimbursable services program here at the airport. We had to renovate a space for them. We spent about $100,000 renovating a space for them that met some pretty tight parameters. But customs will come and serve aircraft at this airport, and then they will just charge us the true cost of that service, the labor cost of that service, and we can make a business decision to pass those costs on to users of the airport or to absorb them, because we want that commerce in the county. This is construction of our latest piece of infrastructure that the port's invested in. It's a ramp on what we call Lot 72, and it has been, we received $5 million in federal funding for it because there was an initiative to build some large hangars in that area. And so the federal government sort of supported our need to get those hangars built, which was pretty wonderful. And this is just an aerial view of the whole project. the ramp that we're building, and these areas that you can see it were under grading at the time are now built with 2 new large hangars. So just going to that culture thing a little bit, we developed a port promise probably 10 years ago at this point. So we promise excellence in public service and leadership within a business landscape that inspires success and enhances the quality of life in Skagit County. And that actually really does serve as a pretty good North Star for us in the work that we do. We've got a staff that has a real can-do attitude. So we really try to balance that sort of being business friendly with thinking about the overall well-being of the community. And that's definitely been a part of our airport planning process. And just kind of the end of the story, that we've seen some success in this. We just in the last year, we've had 6 different private investment development projects happen on the airport to either build hangars or begin building hangars. So between this year, 2021 and 2022, we'll have 6 different projects built. It adds up to close to $20 million in private investment to build these large hangars that we've been looking for. And it's really nice to see that synergy, to see the public investment answered with a private investment, and see everybody kind of focusing on that same vision. And this is just a picture of the construction of some of these new hangars. We had a gentleman that owns a flight school here step up and build some T hangars for us. It's hard for the port to build T hangars and make it cost effective because of all of our contracting requirements, but this was a private project, and we now have 20 new T hangars on the airport. Heritage Flight Museum is expanding. This is actually a conceptual drawing, but they've actually built this expansion wing. They're probably about close to 80% done, something like that now, and that's going to be part of their new Apollo 8 wing. So you might want to go take a look at Heritage Flight Museum. And then where are we going next? It's runway extension. So we've sort of checked off the boxes. We got customs, we're getting the large hangars coming in. Now we need to focus on that runway extension. We're seeing our operations numbers come up. Because we're a non-towered airport, it's hard for us to collect that data. So we have to wait for the FAA to collect some of that data and tell us where our operations are. But based on fuel sales and based on what we're hearing anecdotally from Corporate Air Center, our primary service provider on the airport, we're seeing an uptick in activity as we're bringing the hangars online, bringing new ramp space online. And the trigger for that runway extension is that we need to pass sort of a threshold test with the FAA and have at least 500 annual operations of those larger business jets. So we anticipate that'll happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And the master plan that we are finishing up right now really positions us well to get that done. And that's really kind of our next big objective. There it is again. So that's it. I'm just going to stop right there, and thank you for listening to me. But if you have any questions or you want to talk about any of this, either Heather or I are happy to answer.
It looks like we have a question from Mary.
Yeah, thanks. So not so much a question, but I just wanted to say thank you. That was a great presentation and I learned a lot. And I have to admit, there's been times in the past where I've seen the port doing things and I'm like, that's weird. Why are they doing that? But now that I know that economic development is like the #1 primary goal of ports, I'm like, oh, it makes so much sense now. So just that as like made this whole presentation just make so many things make sense in my mind. So thank you. And it sounds like there's some exciting things happening down in Skagit County.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really good to see examples or case studies of successful projects in our region. That's really, really great information and inspiration for sure.
Well, thank you very much for having us.
Are there any other questions for the Port of Skagit? Well, thank you very much, Sarah and Heather. We'll see you next time. We'd like to remind everyone, if you didn't receive the invite from either Valerie or myself, please put your name in the chat box and we'll be sure to add your email to our email list so you can get future invites for these events. And I'd also like to, so Melissa, I was going to put the link for the survey in. We already have quite a few responses. Thank you so much for your input. It's really, really valuable. Take a few seconds, and provide some feedback. Your board will take all of your responses into consideration as we develop our 2022 work plan. And then I'll also just put in another plug for our December 8th annual meeting. I think the annual membership meeting is a really important thing. We're cutting it close, getting it in the last month of the year. But we hope you'll all be able to attend with us. Anything else from you, Valerie?
Nope. Thanks everyone for being here. Good to see you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Looks like we got a taker for one additional person to add to the email list. That's awesome. Thanks, Michaela.
That was great. Good job.
Yeah, boy, Kevin sure had a great idea with inviting the Port of Skagit. I just thought that presentation was so interesting and really tied in very well with the theme of the forum.
Yeah, I totally agree. That was a good one. Cool. All right. Well, nice to see you, and see you later, I guess. Bye.
Yeah.